to another episode of On the Mic with Ed. You are here with myself, Maria Ortiz, and co-host Dr. Zoe Ross Nash. We also have Jan with us today, and she is going to be talking all things eating disorders and pregnancy. So we are super grateful to have Jan's voice on here today because she has this lived experience perspective about a topic that genuinely needs more attention. So we are very, very grateful. We are very excited for this episode, and we know that this is going to land for a lot of people. So thank you, Jan, genuinely for coming on here, sharing your voice.
Thank you guys for having me. Again, as I said right before the recording, this is such an important conversation to have. It's not discussed in the pregnancy space. I'm going to repeat myself again, but people assume that when you are pregnant and you are able to stay pregnant, that you're healthy, you must be recovered, you must be in some type of recovered space. And the discussion of check-ins, discussions around eating disorders, around food anxieties in general kind of goes out the door. And it also puts what I was thinking when I was sitting down with myself is being pregnant is kind of the first time that your body is put on a stage for most people, and your body's open to discussion, where before that's kind of a nuance, commenting on people's weight, commenting on gaining weight, losing weight, all that. It's not discussed openly, but when you're pregnant, people feel like they're able to comment, oh, your bum's showing, oh, did you gain weight, oh, are you gaining weight, how much have you gained. I think it's more of an open floor, and people feel comfortable having that, where they might not be um, knowledgeable about the experience that you have personally with eating disorders or food anxieties.
Yeah, thank you for saying that so beautifully. There's almost this quality when someone is pregnant that other people own your body, whether it is a medical provider or random people coming up and saying, "Can I touch your belly on the street?" Your body is no longer yours. So I love that language you used about it being a stage. And especially with individuals with histories of eating disorders, not having the narrative, not having the control over your body, the way it's being perceived, the way people are interacting with it, that can be a very big risk factor and really overwhelming. So I want us to talk about this idea of health and fitness when starting a family, and that you have to be the utmost healthy person when you are beginning family planning. So how do you think the influence of that sort of pressure really impacts individuals when they are trying to get pregnant?
Well, first off, I love that you said that your body is no longer yours, because that is the number one theme in pregnancy. It's no longer yours. You're open for the doctors, for your baby, for your family. You're now providing for someone else. So you're not thinking about yourself at all. It's, as people say, the most selfless act you can do. But when you also have anxieties and you have to also regulate yourself, it's hard to not take that into account. And when you're talking about society's pressures, I think there's an overall strive for perfectionism. And I know you guys had that topic be brought up in previous episodes, but the strive for perfectionism, I think, comes around, especially with social media, when people are displaying their most perfect moments, their highlight reel, as people like to say. It's hard not to compare yourself and feel like, why am I not working out every day when I'm pregnant? Why do I not have the energy to get out of bed? Why do I not have the energy to walk around or eat right? Why am I not at my, for me, I was sick all the time. So why am I not able to take in the nutrients I need? Why am I only able to keep down bread? Why am I not able to make these what I eat in a day when I'm pregnant videos and those kind of things? So I think we're seeing all these things around us of people being perfect and getting into a perfect place to get pregnant, to start a family, when in reality, there's no perfect place to start a family. And you don't always have the option to get in the perfect place before starting a family. And sometimes choice isn't involved in the matter. So I think striving for something before getting to the next point in your life is just going to hold you down and create borders for yourself. I'm not sure if that answered your question correctly. I kind of took it off the map.
There's no
No,
correct. Yeah.
absolutely. And I can already tell I'm very excited about this episode because you've already shared a different, like different perspectives I hadn't even really thought of. When you said that like the body's on a stage, I kind of like did a little gasp, and then Zoe saying like your body is not yours, and you just kind of like really nodding with that. Um, it's kind of interesting. It's like make your body the best it can ever be, and then like give it up almost is what I'm like hearing. And
Yes.
it's like yep, this health and fitness, let's strive for perfection. And then like also like a welcome mat is what it feels like for everybody's commentary on how you've done.
Yes.
Um, I also love that you bring up that concept of choice because some people might have literal barriers to health and fitness. Some people might have eating disorders that influence health. I don't even like using the term fitness, but it's used in the community. But of getting the body into like that healthful state, sometimes you don't have an opportunity, choice, or even family planning discussion. So I
Mhm.
think so many of these things, but then social media makes it look like, and then I decided I would like to get pregnant. And then I made all of these changes, got my body into this wonderful place, and then I had this magnificent pregnancy. And I think that it also creates like this illusion of, yeah, highlight reel that I have no idea how attainable or often that actually happens. That people get this almost picture perfect experience.
Right. And then on top of that, the guilt of if you weren't in your most healthy place when you got pregnant, if you were possibly partying or drinking or participating in things that you're not supposed to when you're pregnant and you didn't cut those out before you knew you were going to get pregnant, now you're sitting with the guilt of if anything happens, is this my fault? And those are the thoughts that you constantly will think about if you see everyone, this is how I got myself ready to get pregnant, but you didn't do those steps. You then internalize them and compare yourself. And I think motherhood in general is a comparison game, but it starts from conception, even from before conception, I believe.
All I'm hearing is shame, shame, shame. You are shamed for your behaviors even before you're pregnant. You are shamed for behaviors while you're pregnant. You're shamed for behaviors after you're pregnant. You're shamed for feelings you're having about pregnancy. The fact that you are grieving such a huge part of your life as you're entering pregnancy. But nope, you just have to be happy because you're pregnant and you should love your pregnancy body and everything should be okay.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we're forgetting that sperm is part of the equation and sperm health is also really important to contraception and fetus health. So, what do you like? How do we mitigate against this? What do you think?
I think more, that's a good question, actually, and that kind of stumps me. I think more open discussion between both female and male reproduction, health and fitness, all of that, because when we're talking about females getting pregnant, you're going to the OBGYN, you're going to a specified doctor that's helping you get pregnant or carrying you throughout the process. My husband wasn't required to go to one doctor's appointment throughout my entire pregnancy. He wasn't required to have any type of testing or any of that, any screening, where I was going in monthly, at the end of it, weekly, to watch my weight, be told that I'm not eating right, or be told that I need to eat more, or be told that something's not right. And I think those constant check ins before pregnancy, as well as during pregnancy, with both the mom and the dad, is a good way to open the floor to everyone so that we have feelings and that we feel like it's a shared experience and less like we're alone in it.
Yeah, I think that was an awesome answer. It quite literally, we don't need it to sound like a shared experience. It quite literally is one,
Mhm.
like we
Yes.
need two people. So, um, or at least a sperm and an egg. So I think that that is important. Yeah, no doctor's appointments to, I'd be curious to know how many people are going to within pregnancy is very jarring. And when you go to a doctor, yeah, it's because something needs to be monitored within your body. And it's basically sending this signal almost of no matter what you do, you're going to need to be monitored. So that feels like an obscene amount of pressure. So
Yes.
you came on this pod, obviously, with the lived experience of a pregnancy. Um, and you've also had a lived experience relating to eating disorder pathology. So I'm interested to hear how you navigated your ED pathology, behaviors, or thoughts, and were there any components that were most challenging for you as we discuss this topic?
So when I got pregnant, I think I didn't even realize how deeply rooted my eating disorder behavior and pathologies were in my everyday life. I was living a very independent life. I wasn't around family often. There weren't a lot of pressures for me to eat all the time, to have a consistent schedule with eating, or anyone really checking in with me on that front. So I didn't even realize how often I was skipping meals or how often I was binging and purging behind the scenes and not telling people. And that was so internalized that to me, if anyone asks, I would say, oh, I'm over it. I'm not cheering anymore. I'm out of that world. It's not even prevalent in me anymore. But in reality, I had a set schedule where I knew, okay, if I had eaten this much the night before, I maybe had a couple more drinks than I had wanted to, or if I knew maybe the next day that I had a party that I could skip a couple meals for, I could do that because I wasn't providing for anyone. So when I was pregnant, it really hit me that, okay, you got to do this, you got to eat. And I remember kind of transferring the energy that I was putting into my eating anxieties and my eating disorder behaviors and patterns before I was pregnant, that now that I was pregnant, I was transferring that energy to obsessing over other things like how I could eat right. I remember going into my doctor's office every time being like, I don't feel like I'm eating enough. I don't feel like I'm eating right. Do you have do you have a plan that I could eat? And she was like, no, eat what you can. You're in a vulnerable place right now. We know that you've been getting sick. Eat what you can and try and eat 3 meals a day. And if you can do that, that's an accomplishment. And I remember that took a weight off my shoulders just hearing my doctor say that. But again, behind the scenes, I was transferring all that anxiety energy to just different topics and different areas of my life that I could try and make perfect.
Yeah, the displacement from an ED behavior to a less like obvious behavior, but still highly controlled, highly perfectionistic, highly planned, lots of anxieties around right and wrong and healthful and not healthful and good and bads. And I hear you saying I wasn't providing. And so it sounds like that pressure just really hit of what I do now influences something else and
Yeah.
isn't just influencing me. So I also hear you using this discussion almost as the pregnancy seemed to kind of wake you up into your own awareness or consciousness as to how you were behaving around food. Do you think that pregnancy can almost be a protective factor for ED symptoms? Do you think there's any ways it could be a risk factor?
Yes, I do think it's a protective factor because we're pregnant, it sets a signal off in our mind that it almost gives us permission to indulge in eating and eating consistently and eating what you want and eating more. So I think that was the protective factor of it. But the risk factor is again that transferring of and substituting the anxieties and transferring them around to now different areas of your life. And I also, I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought of it. But I also believe that with that transferring of energy, that could also last and kind of create different areas after pregnancy as well that go into postpartum.
Yeah. I feel like it can almost feel like whack-a-mole. Like you get one problem down and then another one pops up, and I can see how that can really interact with the pregnancy space, where maybe we are engaging in restriction before pregnancy, and then it turns into orthorexia when we enter pregnancy because we want to eat right, we want to nourish our fetus in the best possible way and have the best pregnancy. And then postpartum, it can turn into like the bounce back culture. So I really appreciate this dynamic that we're talking about here. Um, there's, as Maria, said, the risk factor and the protective factor. I imagine that morning sickness, especially if you have a binge purge history, can be quite triggering. And it could be triggering for a couple of reasons. Maybe it's the first time you're engaging in an involuntary purge. And like you're not choosing to have the purge, or it could be a Trojan horse of the eating disorder where it's like, oh, okay, but I still get to purge, but everyone thinks it's morning sickness.
Yes.
Any
I love,
reactions to that?
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you up, but I love that you brought that up because that was a big theme for me as well, is that I was used to purging so that when it became involuntary and I was actually feeling nauseous before, I had triggers in my mind where if I was feeling any type of sickness before, I was purging for sure. But now that I knew had a baby in me, I was trying to not purge. That was the number one thing for me. And then I became obsessed with not purging. And then if I was having that experience or getting sick with it, I was calling my doctor. I'm not eating enough. I'm not keeping anything down and obsessing over it, and even driving myself to the ER twice because I felt like I wasn't keeping anything down. And the guilt from that again, and the shame around that.
You bring up something that we didn't kind of pre-discuss, is this anxiety around pregnancy. And I used to work in an ER, and I cannot tell you how many times per shift pregnant women would come in with some sort of anxiety that something was wrong. And they seemed to basically have no information on if what they were experiencing was one, normal, two, okay, three, if things would get through. And there were a lot of anxieties. And what I'd see a lot is the doctors would be like, no, you're good. It was very rare, it seemed like, that something was like, so glad you came in. And it was just kind of like, well, your body's going to experience a lot of things that are abnormal, but for this temporary amount of time, pretend they are, and then feel fine about it. So I think even, yeah, you driving yourself to the ER, because if you're involuntarily vomiting consistently, I guess it's just normalized in pregnancy. It's just like, well, that's what you deal with. But to what extent are you like, well, but you also said I need 3 meals a day. So if I didn't keep that down, I think that there's just a lot of like ambiguity of what is okay and what's not. And I think that would probably feed that sort of whack-a-mole of perfection because we don't even really have a clear instruction. I think too, some of this is just so dependent on the person. And that's why I think it's so problematic that this social media sort of presence is here because this is such a unique experience, yet people are posting a singular experience and saying this is probably right. Or maybe somebody posted they were vomiting consistently. There was a major problem in their pregnancy. Somebody else was like, I vomited every darn day and my pregnancy was still okay. I think that's where the struggle is on this social media as well of it's this comparison game, and then there's not really clear instructions from a medical provider, it seems like, coming from another direction.
There's
Yeah, I'm sorry.
no, no.
I love that you brought up what's normal in a pregnancy because there is no normal in a pregnancy. There's no normal in a birth, and there's no normal in parenting at all. There's no standard of it. So when you say that no one knows what to compare to or what's normal, there's nothing out there that is normal because everyone is different and everyone's story is different.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the lack of psychoeducation we get around pregnancy. So I went to public school in New Jersey. Maybe it just wasn't part of the curriculum, but majority of it was, like you get pregnant and it's 9 months and then you have a baby. And like all I had was Mean Girl saying if you have sex, you'll get pregnant and die. Like we don't really get true education on pregnancy. And yet most of us are sexually active for majority of our lives. And the pregnancy is a consequence of that. So I imagine that when you are pregnant and you don't really know what this would look like or like the things that are potential health complications or things that you need to be looking out for, that produces a lot of anxiety. And what do we know creates anxiety? Well, or is a product of anxiety? Eating disorder behavior.
Yes, definitely. And they go hand in hand. As with the presence of anxiety, it's so heightened during pregnancy and then so on through parenthood. You have anxieties that you didn't even know existed before. And some people have no experience with anxiety until they get pregnant. So this can be a new chapter for everyone, both with anxiety prior and now experiencing anxiety for the first time. And for people with eating disorders, that anxiety is so heightened that you don't even know what to do with it or where to put that energy into.
I think there's, these pressures before, there's these pressures during, and then unfortunately, none of us can ignore the pressures following. So after this body goes through this monumental change, produces a human, all of these things, you come home with a child, society says, now fix it. And by
Mhm.
it, I mean the body. So it's not like, oh, and let your body heal. I do not know the actual research on this, but what I have seen is that it can take bodies like women's bodies years to fully return to normalcy post-pregnancy. But society says, let's change that weight as soon as you can. So can you talk a bit, Jan, about bounce back culture postpartum, um, and kind of how that can influence both your body image and your sense of identity?
Of course. And I think something that's not discussed a lot is that for most women experiencing pregnancy, this happens in their 20s and their 30s. That's around the time when our hormones are stabilizing out as well. So our bodies are now becoming our mature adult bodies at the same time that we're undergoing pregnancy. So we're experiencing hormonal shifts with pregnancy on top of hormonal stabilizing for adulthood. And your body might not have been the same because you're now 25, your metabolism is different, your hormones are different, but now you're also pregnant. So you're adding the weight gain from that. so you're trying to bounce back, but also combat the aging effect of that. I think there's two factors that come into play, at least with for me, I was 23. So I was just coming into my adult body. And I didn't realize that after pregnancy, I already wasn't going to be the same. I was 24 years old. My body wasn't going to be the same as it was when I was 22 discussing getting pregnant. But now I'm trying to get back to a body that is unrealistic now at this point. And when you're breastfeeding, you still feel that living for someone else factor that you're, and it is kind of a protective factor where you're providing for someone else. So when you're breastfeeding, you feel like, okay, I'm able to eat more. It's that permission again of I'm able to indulge. I have to eat a certain amount of calories. I have to keep up with the baby. I have to produce enough. But as soon as breastfeeding stops, I feel like for me personally, it started a clock in my head of when am I going to get back in those jeans? When am I going to get back in that dress? When can I get back to what I was before? And for most people, that's unrealistic, both because of pregnancy and also because of all the factors around it.
Yeah, you're busy keeping something alive. Maybe we don't have time to be thinking about, oh, am I going to get back to my pre-pregnancy body? What a pressure. I actually saw a GLP-1 medication specifically targeting post-pregnancy women. It was an advertisement for it. I saw it on the news. And talk about a vulnerable population. And Maria, your jaw is dropped right now. Like, I know what a vulnerable population. And we are specifically targeting them to a GLP-1. My heart was breaking because there's already so many things women have to worry about post-pregnancy. Do we have to be adding this into the equation and feeling the pressure to utilize a medication like that we don't really know the consequences of, which is so scary. So, what would you? I want us to maybe focus more on the protective factors of pregnancy and eating disorders. What would you say that is, Jan?
I think it's that providing for, as we discussed, the providing for someone else, but also I think the question of who are you recovering for? When you have someone else to do it for, it kind of is a motivating factor to recover. When it's for yourself, sometimes it's harder to do it for yourself. So when there's now a baby and also the pressure of this is my family and my family's depending on this being the beginning of our family, that puts pressure on us to provide and everything. And that in turn protects us from the eating disorder, anxieties, and behaviors that we had indulged in possibly before.
Jan, I have kind of a rogue question for you that just came to mind as we've been chatting. So you've discussed how you openly were talking to your providers about what can I be eating? Should I be eating more? Is there a perfect amount? I'm vomiting, all of these things. Were you ever screened for an eating disorder history during your pregnancy treatment?
No. And it's funny you say that because on my initial paperwork for my OBGYN office, they ask if you have a previous history with eating disorders. And I remember having in my head, should I mark this? Should I not mark this? I'm not diagnosed, but I personally know I have history for it. And I remember that was the first day that I was like, you know what? I'm going to mark it because someone needs to know. And that was the first time that I had wrote on paper that I have experience with this and that I had been dealing with it. And after marking that, not one person brought it up. I wasn't provided with any resources or information about it. My doctor never checked in about it. My doctor was great about not putting any type of pressure on what I'm eating and that kind of thing for me, but there was no discussion on do you want to see the scale? Do you want to see the numbers? Do you want us to hide it? Do you need information about counseling? Do you need further resources for eating disorders? It was never discussed, never checked in, never talked about, even after I had clearly marked it and had been discussing it openly.
That's terrible. It makes me wonder why even put the question on there, and it makes me feel like that they check marked a box that they're required to quote unquote screen, and they went, we screened. But it especially kind of broke my heart for your story because this was the first time that you accepted this for yourself. And that's such an identity shift when you acknowledge I've struggled with an eating disorder or I am currently struggling. That's a huge moment. And then to not be followed up with validity and with care and with concern and appropriate, medical accommodation and questioning is really upsetting. Especially because you can tell you said it's the first time you really thought about it. And how rewarding, or not rewarding, but how great would that have been if somebody said, "Hey, let's talk about this. Do you have resources? Do you have concerns with resources? Hey, we've got some vomiting. Was that a part of that eating disorder history?" So I'm genuinely sorry that was your experience. I think that's why we wanted to do this podcast too, because it's kind of like, where's the discussion?
There
Um,
is none. That's why I think it's so important. It feels like none. As someone who went through the experience, I don't feel like this was brought up in my OBGYN's office. I don't feel like it was brought up even afterwards, beforehand, or when I was openly discussing it. And I think that's a major problem in the industry, definitely.
What an opportunity missed, especially since in Maria and I's work, recognizing that fertility is a huge part of a lot of reasons why people recover. And when we see amenorrhea, which is a loss of menstruation, fertility is connected to that. And ideally, we find recovery and individuals are able to get pregnant. But I think pregnancy is a huge reason why people are motivated towards recovery. Or sorry, pregnancy is a huge reason why people are motivated towards recovery. And the fact that someone said, I have this in my history and I'm trying to get pregnant, knowing how vulnerable that was, and then it wasn't even acknowledged. It's really, really sad.
I think there's a misconception too on how vulnerable that is to answer that question. It kind of reminds me of a time back in kind of like athletics, and it was like this single line question: "Have you ever struggled with an eating disorder?" And like that was all. And I remember being like, "What a profound question to just have Y and N."
Mhm.
And so even that line of question, it's kind of like maybe we could have a if yes. What were your symptoms? Are they current? Are they, in the past? So even that line of questioning is eating disorder is such a broad term. There are so many different presentations within the same diagnosis, but simply eating disorder, they didn't even know at that point if that was binging restriction. They didn't know if that could be ARFID tendencies, rumination. So, I'm just glad that we're having this discussion, and it makes me think of the overall kind of lack of awareness. So, I was really caught off guard when I read a certain statistic that I'm about to introduce, that I really think is important for this topic. So, according to the American College of Obstetricians, I should have checked on that word before,
I don't know.
and
Yeah.
gynecologists, approximately 10 to 20% of known pregnancies end in miscarriage. So that's 10 to 20% of known pregnancies and miscarriage. And 1 in 160 pregnancies will be affected by stillbirth. Do you guys believe that society appropriately approaches this topic for individuals to feel supported through the grieving process, the likelihood of outcome, prognosis? Is there any part of your story that you'd feel comfortable sharing about these topics?
I don't believe that there's enough discussion around miscarriage and how often it does happen. I think both people and doctors don't talk about it enough. It wasn't discussed in my pregnancy much. It was talked about before the 12-week mark of things this could happen, but no discussion on if this is happening, this is what you can expect. And if this is happening, this is what you can do. And a lot of the time with pregnancies now, you aren't seen until usually around the 8-week mark. So with my second pregnancy that did not go to full term, I had anxieties throughout my entire pregnancy that something isn't right. I'm not feeling the same. And I was calling. I kept saying, I kept trying to find any excuse to try and get seen by the doctor. I'm having insane nausea. I'm having crazy headaches. Something's not right. I'm cramping. Everything I said, they said this is normal. And you might be experiencing it because it's your second pregnancy. You're cramping because your body is growing faster this time. And even when I knew myself, I've been pregnant before. something I'm used to experiencing, no one said, "Oh, well, you can come in. It's fine. We'll make time for you. We'll make an appointment. We'll squeeze you in," or anything like that. They said, "You have your 8 week appointment." By the time I got to my 8 week appointment, I was actively miscarrying. And I didn't, they sent me home as well from that appointment with no information on what to expect when I was home, what type of bleeding I would be having or anything like that. So I ended up calling or driving myself to the ER that night because I was so anxious about what my body was going through. And I had no information besides Dr. Google over here telling me that nothing's normal, the doctor on the phone telling me everything's normal, and then going into the ER. And of course, no OBGYNs there. The ER doctor is telling me, "Oh, you're having an ectopic pregnancy." So then I'm thinking I'm having an ectopic pregnancy. I go through what I think the next weeks are of basically a ticking time bomb in my tubes. And there's no information given to me of what to expect pain wise, what's normal, what's not normal, when to go in. They're basically just saying go in at the worst catastrophic moment when you're bleeding on the floor and unable to wake up. So I think education around miscarriages, ectopic pregnancies, any type of abnormal pregnancy is not openly discussed until you're at that point. So I think discussion before that happens and possibly bringing in prenatal appointments before the 8 week mark would help ease anxieties as well as possibly get ahead of problems that we experience during miscarriage and early pregnancy problems.
Jan, thank you so much. Like, we need to be discussing this and having your story be shared. I know a lot of people, I'm like, I feel it. I find myself like hard to swallow. It, I'm really glad and thankful that you're sharing your story because 10%, 10 to 20% of pregnancies end in miscarriages. This is happening to our friends, this is happening to our partners, this is happening to our loved ones, our sisters, our children, and we're not talking about it. And we don't even know what to do when it is happening. That's how bad we're not talking about it. I think about that saying of like, oh, don't tell people too early you're pregnant because you never know. And it's like, well, if something happens, I'm gonna need my support system. And yet we're told women should be suffering in silence, um, by themselves alone.
Yes. And I love that you say that it's happening to our friends and our family, our moms, our daughters, everything around us, because again, this wasn't discussed with me until it was happening to me. And now that I openly talk about what happened to me, I have women that I talk to that I've known my entire life that now are just telling me their experience with miscarriage, with DNCs, with uh, possibly abortions and those kind of things. Women don't discuss it. A lot of women do this behind closed doors and on their own, and then they go through the aftermath of it on their own. So when we're talking about miscarriage and we're talking about anxieties and eating disorders, one thing that's really not discussed in miscarriage is the after effects of feeling guilt, feeling shame, feeling like the work you maybe put in went to nothing. Um, and when we talk about the bounce back, that's also present in miscarriage. You were providing for a baby, you're gaining weight, you're going through all these pregnancy symptoms, and afterwards, you are dealing with postpartum. Your body feels like it gave birth. Sorry. Um, uh, sorry.
And there's no apologies necessary here because um, this is a very real, horrible situation that you have gone through that unfortunately many women have. And I actually appreciate your authenticity because I think society says, get it together, talk about it nice and strong. No, the real and the tears are okay because these are like catastrophic impacts on lives and senses of identity and that hope that you would feel for wanting to be a mom kind of temporarily, ripped away, or even if it's a second child. I think too, when you talk about the bounce back, quote unquote, culture from a miscarriage, it's like you're just supposed to like re-engage with your life, number one, or number two, as Zoe mentioned, nobody should even know about it.
Mhm.
which I also find to be completely insane and ridiculous. That it's like basically let's protect the people around you from feeling uncomfortable.
Yes.
I think that's so backwards. I totally agree with what Zoe said. And I actually did have a friend say to me, I knew that she had a history of a miscarriage and um, she was pregnant again. And I remember somebody said, I'm shocked you're saying something so early. And she goes, oh, I'm going to need my people if I go through this. I need
Mhm.
people to know what's going on. And it's sad that that was like surprising because yet we've been told if you go through this, one, nobody should know. Two, if they do know, probably bounce back emotionally, physically pretty well. And three, don't talk about it too much. And four, if you do, you better have a strong voice. I think a strong voice is sometimes a wavering one because it's real.
Yeah, definitely. And with postpartum, there's no discuss, or with miscarriage, there's no discussion about postpartum and the after effects of it and the mental math of that you go through after you give birth. Typically, women are given 3 months recovery. When you go through a miscarriage, you're sometimes not given any barrier. If you didn't tell anyone that you're going through it, you sometimes aren't given any days off work. For me, I didn't tell my work I was pregnant until I was miscarrying. I felt like I had to because I was dealing with this and I didn't know there was no other way I could tell them, hey, I'm going to need a couple weeks off work. I'm now going through postpartum, basically. And I remember I said that to my coworker, and she was even like, oh my God, I never thought about that, that your body did go through pregnancy and you're experiencing the after effects. And actually, with my doctor, our pregnancy affects your body in so many different ways. And after my pregnancy, especially with my periods, were different. And especially with my second pregnancy, my periods changed after. And this wasn't discussed with me that my body, it wasn't discussed with me that my body had gone through a pregnancy basically. And it took my doctor saying to me, your body was pregnant. You're experiencing these hormonal changes and these period changes because your body knew it was providing for someone else. It had all these, the same hormonal shifts that a pregnant person had because you were pregnant. And that was something that was not a nuance to me, that I was going through postpartum, but I didn't have a baby physically.
And it makes so much sense to me how an eating disorder can then manifest after an experience like that, where
Mhm.
you are so out of control with your body and feeling uncertain and disconnected from it. It makes sense that we might utilize food or exercise as a way to make sense of the experience. What, as a whole, what do you think the eating disorder community needs to focus on in terms of pregnancy and I guess miscarriage too?
I think possibly ingraining eating disorder education or putting a backbone of eating disorder education with women care and OBGYNs, gynecology, having those type of resources within the OBGYN offices would be a huge help, and having those open discussions as we talked about when that's marked as previous history, or when a patient's discussing openly having anxiety around food, that maybe we take a second and we stop and we have that discussion in the office of the OBGYN and we discuss possibly bringing in another professional like one of you two lovely ladies to possibly be on that healthcare team for the pregnant patient. I don't know what the logistics of that is and ingraining it, but I think if there was some type of education within the women's care space, I mean, that's a huge, huge.
Well, I think the first thing that Zoe and I can do is send the link to this episode to any OBGYN office in our area. It's the first thing we could start with. And I
Yeah,
kind of mean that seriously of like, listen to this individual's story and please don't let it happen again.
yes,
Please give the education. If somebody checks that box, please ask it a singular follow-up question at the bare minimum, most likely requires more. But I think that that's where we could at least start. Um, and it's sad that you're like, I don't know the logistics of that because I hate that this is a logistical problem because this is also the most deadly mental health disorder. And we're asking for a bare minimum of awareness and education given in women's health. I think that's a whole nother podcast. Yeah, Zoe.
yeah. And I think the connection between eating disorders and unfortunately women it seems more prevalent for females. So I think having that discussion within healthcare and women's healthcare is very important.
Yeah. I also want providers to know that weight gain in pregnancy is destabilizing for anyone, eating disorder history or not. This doesn't necessarily just have to be, oh, we did a pre-screener. If they have a history, we'll check on it. If they don't, we don't have to worry about it. This sort of huge bodily change is dysregulating, and you have shifts in your identity, you have shifts in your day-to-day functioning, you have shifts in so many qualities of how you understand yourself. This could be a time where an eating disorder does then manifest.
And I think of, if we look at some of the functions of eating disorders, we think of things like punishment. So if somebody feels like they did something wrong in their pregnancy, that ED can swoop in. I think of a lot of the, big name things that we like to say, like body gratitude and body neutrality. I think it would be incredibly challenging to feel body neutral, much less gratitude for a body that you feel wildly let you down. And so I think a lot of these things too I hadn't even really thought of that on the time off work. And I can't believe that myself as a woman hasn't even had this come across my radar simply because I have not been pregnant. So I think that just shows the lack of awareness, but um, not even having the time off work, but also like that identity shift of like, I'm about to have another baby to like, never mind. Eating disorders also encapsulate so much of our identities that it could be like, I have one for you. You can go back to being the one that restricts. So,
Mhm.
as Zoe said earlier, we are just very grateful for your voice and your story, your vulnerability here. I think women are talking now, but I think things like this matter and they go a really long way. And I feel like there could be one person even that listens to this that goes, holy cow, I could relate to her. So I'm very appreciative. Is there any kind of final messages, maybe like even a message of hope for listeners today, if anybody on here can relate to your story?
I think the one theme to keep in everyone's mind is that there is no normal, there's no way to compare yourself to anyone in motherhood, in parenting, in pregnancy, in womanhood in general. Every single person is different. There's no way to compare yourself. It's apples to oranges. And I know that's easier said than done completely. I mean that for myself as well. But there is no normal. Everyone's experience is different with everything. And pregnancy, tenfold, it's going to be different for everyone.
And pregnancy can be a signifier of recovery, and how cool that your body did that.
Mhm.
So we can celebrate these pieces too. As scary as they are, we need to be holding all of this in our brain at the same time, which is complicated. And your body did that, which is pretty incredible.
Yes. Yeah. And even if I think in when we're talking about miscarriages and loss, even if you're not able to carry a pregnancy full term, experiencing womanhood in general is such a gift, and experiencing to them to the fullest and discussing those experiences is extremely important. So I wanted to thank you guys so much for opening your podcast, to having me on and letting me speak my story and everything. It's been so relieving and just a weight lifted to get my word out there.
Maria, any last comments for you too?
Um, just a kind of another thank you to Jan. And I love how you just normed that, like, whatever your experience is with pregnancy, not just a full-term pregnancy, is something to be discussed. That any part of your experience with pregnancy, with your body as a woman, um, it deserves to be discussed and talked about. So I really appreciate you sharing that sentiment as well.
Yeah, and we deserve to be proud of our bodies, and we deserve to discuss everything that we're going through as women. And I appreciate you guys having this podcast, and in general, just being women who are open to having those discussions in everyday public. I know when I met Zoe, she was very open in having any type of discussion as a woman. And Maria, when I met you as well, just having those type of discussions, that's so important, both for women and men, just in general, for society to hear.
Jan and I met at Maria's wedding, and we truly we went everywhere and anywhere. And my husband was right there, and he's like, "Is this normal for you, Zoe?" And I was like, "Yes, are you kidding?" So I just love that us three are able to have these type of conversations, and I know there are other women out there who want to have that conversation too. So thank you again, Jan, and wherever you are, whoever you are, take a seat with us.